All right. Welcome to Fifth Element's Saturday sermon. I never do the intro. It feels really weird. I am Nicole. I've done a few sermons before, and today's sermon is something that kind of came up because there's been a lot of question, specifically between clients of mine that have come to me and been like, all right, what's this thing that you guys are doing? Like, is it a cult? Like, there's a lot of that kind of question. And in discussing that with Jess and Jordan, we kind of came to realize that people have like a lot of wounding around the word religion, the word church, very specifically. We hear the word church and we think of one very specific thing. We think of Christians, Catholics, the building. And it makes sense as to why people would have kind of a bad taste in their mouth about the word church, right? Like there's been, scandal in the Catholic Church for a very, very, very long time. Religion in general, there has been so much, like we have religious wars going on, right? So having a bad taste in your mouth about that makes a whole lot of sense. Um, for me, I can talk of my experience. I mean, we all know, we all either have some kind of religious wounding based on our own experiences, or we have seen religion outside of us that gives us kind of an impression of what it is. And so I can talk about my experience with religion because I have it. And then what I kind of want to do is break down what it actually means, what church actually means. And in kind of thinking about how I was going to form this sermon today, I came across this really cool article about religion in general that I want to do a little reading about. And funny enough, when I was growing up going to church, the sermon was my favorite part. And it was the time when, the priest would read the gospel and then he would stop and he would tell a story. And that was always so cool because a lot of the times the stories never had anything to do with religion as it was. It was, this is the gospel and this is how it applies to real life. And so even with my own religious wounding, I still have little bits of things in me from growing up that I still really hold dear to me about going to church. So with me, I grew up Catholic, and I grew up Portuguese Catholic. And what that means for me is that I had to go to church twice on Sundays. I went to church and I sat in church for English Mass, and then I also sat in church for Portuguese Mass. As I got a little bit older, I then had to sing in the English choir and in the Portuguese choir. And again, that part of it, the singing part of it for me was it's I'm a singer outside of my work that I do. I sing in a band and I've always been a singer. And so that again, you hear so many so many singers, Whitney Houston, right? Like grew up singing in the church. Beyonce grew up singing in the church. And so people got their start doing these things in the church. And so again, like there's some really beautiful things about what religion can do for a person, but there is so much darkness in it as well. So I've told this story to clients and I actually made a huge post about it. The one thing that really got me kind of on my path to spirituality was when I was 9 years old, I saw the movie All Dogs Go to Heaven. And it was a great movie. Um, and I went to Sunday school and I was talking to my friends at Sunday school about it. And my Sunday school teacher came to me and she said, well, animals can't go to heaven because they don't have souls. And it was in that moment that I was like, well, that's not real and that's not true. And I knew innately in my deepest being that that wasn't real. And that got me on the journey of, well, if this isn't real, what else are they telling me that isn't real? Right. And it's one of those things where religion, it, how do I say it? You know, there's that old saying, like the road to hell is paved in good intentions, right? And in the beginning, religion started out as this really beautiful, beautifully intended thing. And along the lines, power and the need for power kind of destroyed what the actual basis of religion actually was. And so I want to look at the word church. And interestingly enough, when people think of church, they think of a building, right? You know, we're going to church. I'll see you at church. But the word church comes from the Greek word ecclesia, and it means the ones who are called out. So during Bible times, that word could have been used for so many things, right? It could have been used to describe a group of people in a town who were called out to be part of a meeting. It could have been used to describe a council of people that were called together to vote on something. But the Bible writers used it very specifically to describe the member of Christ's church who were called out in the world of sin by following the teachings of Christ. And so that word church and the actual meaning of the word has gotten so watered down. Religion, very specifically, the most unbiased and the most basic definition just means a system of beliefs and practices by which a group of people struggles with the ultimate problems of life. It doesn't necessarily mean worshiping a specific god or specific gods or specific deities at all. It only just means being in a group of people together for a common goal, right? And so when shaping or trying to think about what I was going to talk about today, I came across this really interesting article about religion, right? So if you think about what the oldest religion is, most people will say Hinduism, um, as an organized religion, right? But in my research, I found out that the first and earliest religion, all of them resembled shamanism. And so many people, when they think of shamanism, they don't think of it as a religion because, again, when people think of religion, they think of worshiping a specific god or gods. So shamanism, although technically only describing tribal Siberian traditions, because that's what the word shaman actually comes from, nowadays it's used to describe a basic set of beliefs that is found across the globe in tribal cultures. Some people, especially among Australian Aboriginal or Native American, Oceanic, and Siberian populations, they still follow a form of shamanism today. In Africa, they have animism, and it's also still practiced a lot among a lot of remote tribes. But the shamans of the ancient world, it was centered around an idea that sounds super foreign to a lot of like lay people now, and it's the direct religious experience. So back then, people didn't have books or services. They had themselves, they had the tribe, and the tribe had some sort of shaman. And the shaman was a spiritual leader who was in a position that entailed a bunch of duties, right? The druids, were like the perfect example of like the jack of all trades shaman, right? They were experts in astronomy and astrology, medicine, law, politics, divination. And regardless of what other peripheral duties they all had, all shamans across the globe had one duty in particular, and that was as to act as a bridge between the physical and the spiritual worlds. And so this is where the idea of direct religious experience comes into play. There's a central tenet in all forms of shamanism, and it's that the physical world of our everyday lives is not the only world that exists. Our world is, in fact, being constantly acted upon by separate spiritual world, one that's inhabited by formless forces that guide all physical events, right? There was a spirit in every physical being, and the spirit could be contacted directly by the shaman through the entering of a trance or an otherwise altered state of consciousness. And this was the central tenet of shamanism. Religion wasn't made up of old stories of, you know, immortal gods, but it was a reverence for a tangible place that a shaman could travel for wisdom and answers to important questions. So how did the system of direct experience turn into one where it's all prophets and wealthy priests, right? So at the beginning of the Bronze Age, the tribal world began to shrink and the civilized world began to take its place. So whenever tribal societies transitioned into more structured ones, the role of shamans seemed to kind of go away. They were replaced with priests, people who fulfilled many of the same duties of traditional shamans, but they rejected the tradition of venturing into the spirit world for guidance. Instead, they kind of brought about the invention of, or instead probably brought about by the invention of writing. Priests taught stories about deities that were untouchable by mortal men. Spirits turned into gods. Shamans wearing heads and skins of animals to channel their spirits turned into these hybrid man-beast deities, right? Religion became less of a mechanism for communities to tackle their problems and more of a mechanism for the ruling class to exert control over their subjects. Shamans use their authority to benefit their tribes, and priests use their authority to benefit themselves via demanding tax and sacrifice. And not like animal sacrifice, but well, some animal sacrifice, but sacrifice of the congregation and the community. There is speculation that some Bronze Age city-states, specifically those in Mesopotamia, were governed by priest kings, which is a scary thought. So as time progressed, the priestly classes in these civilizations, they lost their authority to the monarchies, and the role of the individual in organized religion had largely died among advanced people. So among the peoples of the Near East, it was still very much alive and well. They specifically, those in the ancient Hebrews, developed prophets as a way to revive the role traditionally filled by shamans. So as priests were doing very little to connect people with their gods at the times, the prophets took that position for themselves. While the priestly class kind of basked in the wealth that was handed over to them by their commoners, the prophets gave the same commoners new advice and guidance from allegedly the gods themselves. Prophets weren't just the mouthpiece of old gods, they also served another function, and that one would shake the very foundations of the world because they facilitated the transition from polytheism to monotheism, so multi-god to one singular god. Prophets, as far as we can tell, always only claimed to speak to one god in particular. So thus, if one prophet's message grew particularly popular, their corresponding god would also grow popular alongside them. This led to the rise of monotheic religions such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so here we see the personal relationship with spiritual beings beating out to the interpersonal religious establishments. And it was a return to the proximity with the divine that was so central to shamanism. Pardon me. This revival in direct religious experience ended up being super short-lived, though. Prophetic religions, particularly those of Abrahamic descent, were soon codified and contained to religions of books. So as Christianity and Islam took over large parts of the world, new prophets were largely looked down upon, and they eventually fizzled out entirely. Like the rigid polytheistic religions their ancestors overthrew, the Abrahamic faith soon became governed by priestly classes with a very low tolerance for those who questioned them. This, however, was a shaky system, and it was soon to come apart. As a quick departure, it's important to note that while we focus mostly on the Western and Near East worlds, the patterns that emerged within them did not emerge anywhere else. In the Far East, shamanism and other folk religions coexisted and even blended with popular philosophies like Taoism until the emergence of the modern world. In India, Hinduism is thought to have originated as an outgrowth of the original Indo-European religions, never having fallen into conflict with its competitors, right? In Africa and the Caribbean, local shamanic and animistic traditions continued uninterrupted until eventually synthesizing with Christianity and Islam into what can now be considered Creole religions, right? Elsewhere in the Americas, Australia and Oceania, shamanic traditions were almost entirely wiped out by Christian colonization. So while these religions have often found themselves under the thumb of others in recent centuries, their religious developments are no less important because they show the many ways that seemingly default religion of shamanism can develop. And so returning to the history of the now dominant Abrahamic faiths, we see almost that the religious stability they once have brought about is beginning to crack, right? Ever since the Reformation, the traditional doctrines of Christianity have been in constant question. New prophets like Joseph Smith, most famous, have arisen. In Islam, divisions have slowly grown ever since the era of, I don't know what this word is, Caliphates. In the last couple of centuries, especially in the West, this process of Abrahamic religions has only accelerated. And at the same time, these dominant religions have also encountered outside competitions. So non-Abrahamic religions like occultism, neo-paganism, and New Age spirituality have all gained massive traction. And so the pattern is kind of clear. The religious landscape, especially in the West, is rapidly fracturing for the most part, and people are starting to wake up to a new realization. As much as we all hate COVID and what COVID did for everyone, for a lot of people, it made them question everything, right? Everyone started to wake up to these things. And they were searching for spirituality. There was such, Jess and I have talked about this multiple times, there was such an uptick in our businesses because we run spiritual businesses. People like searching for answers and needing answers outside of things that they thought that they knew, right? And the realization is that religion was never meant to be a concrete institution. It began as an experience, and it refuses to let go of its roots. Following others blindly and believing in their books is not the answer. And instead, if you choose, because some people don't follow any kind of like religious beliefs, you know, we have atheists. And if you look at the definition of religion, right, like a group of people trying to figure out the world, atheism could be considered a religion in and of itself. But if you choose to use religion or a tradition that best leads to self-actualization as a tool to live in your best life, that is more the answer. Choosing the tradition to discover your own divinity. That's kind of the answer, right? So I want to open it up to anyone who has anything to say. Gordon, I'm sure you have stuff.
Just some observations I made along
Yeah.
the way. One of them is the movement from shamanism into more structured and rigorously defined religion, left behind the divine feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Because in shamanism, you had female shamans and male shamans, and
Right.
everyone knows that we need both the female mode of nurture and the male mode of nurture in everything that we do.
Mm-hmm.
And in most of the structured religions, you don't see priest queens, right? Or female priests. That's only a new construct that has developed more recently. But there's a lot that was lost there. Another thing that I've discovered, having left organized religion myself, and I grew up in an old world Italian, Portuguese, Catholic family, right? So I had the same binds. I discovered that if you take away some of the rigidity from the organized religions and you look at the Quran or the Torah or the Christian Bible without all of the systems of control, you very quickly see through that it's all meant to be metaphor for underlying spiritual truth that occurs in common across all the systems. Right. And then all of a sudden, this stuff becomes really useful in terms of releasing pain and releasing wounding and releasing all the things that hold us back, so that, as we notice and we let go and we become freer and more enlightened and more empowered, it's what all of those systems were meant to convey. It's what they were all meant to leverage for us. And yet they've sucked all the power out of it. Right. And it's sad. It's grievous. Yeah. But, I think that ministries like this are essential now in helping to kind of transport people out in such a way that they don't have to completely abandon the systems that they've grown up with. They can come to see them in new ways and benefit fully from the traditions, the signs, the symbols, the ceremonies that can be so useful on a journey. but to experience them in more effective ways. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I loved what you had to share. It was right on the
So
money. Bravo.
what we've been finding very specifically, um, again, with people just being like, "Oh, what are you guys doing? Like, why are you using the word church?" And we decided that this was kind of a two-part thing. Like we wanted to have another sermon to kind of, speak to our mission more as us, the three of us being, the forward-facing part of Fifth Element, right? And so that'll be another sermon in a few weeks. But what we found, and this is the biggest one, I feel like one of the biggest parts of religious wounding is that people are like, there's so much fear, right? And it's not even just fear of the words, it's fear of doing any of the work to figure out what we're doing, right? Because if you look at our website, our mission is right there. If you look at our doctrine, which is on our website, our what we believe in and what we stand for is right there. And yet people still don't even want to go that far as to do that because they're to look for it because there's just so much fear behind these words, right? And I do this with clients a lot. I work through client fears pretty frequently. And, you know, we as people inherently like to sit in uncomfortable places because the fear of doing something else becomes more uncomfortable, right? And interestingly enough, I was thinking about this morning actually, and oh God, where was I going? I was thinking about this morning. Um, I think I just lost it.
Did your train of thought get derailed?
My train of thought got derailed. Um, anyway, back to fear, like we have all of this fear around trying to figure out new things, right? And so people would rather just stay in their space where they're super uncomfortable. um I wish I could figure out what I was thinking. Oh man, that's terrible.
You
um
will.
I will, I think. I'm Yeah, growing up in a Catholic church, the indoctrination is so real from that if I still like I will still go into a church and I haven't. I mean, I went through all of my sacraments, I went through all the things full well knowing that I didn't believe in any of them, because but my parents still made me go. Um and I stopped going to church a long, long, long time ago. And then I remember a couple years ago, I went with my daughter's father's family to like a Christmas Eve service. And his mom is Episcopal. And I went to this Episcopal church service, and there are children running around everywhere. And my little Catholic heart started freaking out because how dare children run in church? Like, we would have gotten yelled at if we did anything out of line in church. But apparently in this Episcopal church, like they don't mind kids running around, right? But there's that, oh my God, like you're not supposed to be doing that. And it's still so deeply ingrained inside of me, someone who has like spent their life trying to like disprove and speak these words of truth to people. It's still so deeply inside of me, right? I can still go into a church. When my mom passed away and I had to go to a mass, I can still go into a church and I still know when to kneel. I still know when to stand. I still know all of the call and responses to the masses. It is wild how easily that recall comes back, even though I haven't experienced it in so long. And that's really scary. And there is so much fear around that. Oh, what I was thinking about earlier, right? Um, as far as religious wounding is concerned, people believe that their experience in life, right, is the ultimate truth. And while it is their truth, it is not the ultimate truth. And I think that's why people have a hard time trying to do research outside of that, right? It's like, well, I had this experience with church. This is what church is. You can't tell me that it doesn't mean anything else or that it isn't anything else because this is my experience. And that I feel like that's like a common thing everywhere. Um, that was my thought earlier.
Very
But
cool.
yeah, so my, I don't know, my suggestions, I guess, for people who are struggling with any type of wounding. And my religious wounding is nothing in comparison to some people's. There are some people who grew up in evangelical families, or Jehovah's Witness families, or Mormon families, right? You have Mormons, and you hear about, like, I don't know what the name that they use for when they send them out at 16 years old or 18 years old to experience the world, right? But they get to go out and they get to experience the world, and then they're given the choice if they want to come back or not. But if they don't want to come back, they're told that they have nothing, that they're not allowed to come back. They're not allowed to have their families. They're not allowed to have anything that they once knew. And it's that fear that gets instilled in them that really, like, most of them pulls them right back in, because no matter how big and expansive and wonderful the outside world is and how many experiences they can have out there, if they don't choose to come home, who are they going to have and what are they going to do, right? And being able to kind of find that connection to self, you have to be, I don't know, and I hate to say this, but you have to have a little bit of, like, mental strength there, right? You have to have some belief. And for me, what I did and what I continue to do all the time is to just really sit and ask myself what my spirituality is, what it means to me, what spirituality as a whole means, and what I'm trying to get out of it. And my spirituality has changed over the years. I went from being very Catholic, and then just being like, well, fuck all of that, to then going into more like polytheic religious things, and thinking that I believed or worshipped these other deities, trying to find something to believe in. Everyone wants to try to find something to believe in. And that morphed into me realizing that the only thing that I had to believe in was me. Um, and that is what created my greatest, like, connection to my higher self, or my God self. People have a huge turn off to the word God, um, because they just don't know. And they're so fearful that they just, I don't even know if they don't choose to do the work to figure it out. They're just so fearful of figuring out something different or something new. Um, yeah, that's what I've got. That's what I've got. I decided to not fully prepare for my sermon today. Um, and I don't know how I feel about not fully preparing for my sermon. Um, but yeah,
Well,
that's what I have.
I'd like to
You were
share.
well prepared.
Please share.
Okay. Um, Kind of just offshooting of what you last just said of, people fearing the word God, and how it's been brought to us of this one thing, this one God, when in fact, right, God, it's everything. It's all of it. It doesn't
Right.
have, you know, especially with a micro focus on diminishing God and having God be fearful. And it's like,
Right.
oh, God, fear, it's love, it's life. That's God. um, and yeah, this was great as a also brought up Franco, Portuguese, Catholic, Greek Orthodox
Wow.
speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, heavy traditions. I wanted to be a nun. Okay, that's how I was like, oh my gosh, I get to devote my whole entire life to God. I don't have to deal with a partner. I don't have to deal with this. Great, sign me
Mhm.
up. Like, um, and then I knew more, and I was like, never mind.
Yeah.
But no, it's true. The traditions deeply set uh, within myself, where eventually and it was just puberty of really coming into myself and sexuality, and how sexuality is in the church,
Right.
which is, gosh, it should be expressed, it should be talked about in a in a healthy way. Um, so, that for me, that's when I stopped going to church, started, reading, doing other things. Yet with, folks like yourself, Nicole, and Jessica, and the whole ministry and what you're doing, I've also connected with another group as well that brings this a whole combination of things together, and has really helped me with what I still love about my experience with the Catholic Church, and solely was the Rosary. And to bring in that feminine is to say the Rosary, and I do with a group of folks. We gather every week, and it's just been so healing. It's been so healing to could connect and heal in just a different way. Never mind my own path with yoga and meditation and all the things. And for you folks to start this ministry, because I always feel like an oddball. Like, is there a place for me? And like, yeah, there is, right here. So yeah, no, I was glad I got to join and at least listen a little bit while I got ready to your sermon. Because it needs to be talked more about, for people to heal and be more comfortable, to try new things. And hey, if some things don't work for you, leave it behind and take what does. I'm a huge, huge person on that. So
I think
that's what I got.
People, I mean, we are innately tribes people, right? Like, we yearn and long for community. We yearn and long for belonging. If back in cave people times, if you went against the tribe, like, you got kicked out of the tribe and you died. And so we really, like, it's this part of our brain that we have and we've had forever and ever. We want community, and we want to feel accepted, and we want to feel like we belong to something. And it's like, organized religion now, what it's become, as a whole, it's almost like an abusive partner, right? People continue to go to church, the building, and they continue to believe in these things mostly for that sense of community. And it's like, you said it, Felicia, like, you feel like the oddball, or like, do I belong somewhere else? Like, I'm sure, I can only imagine the amount of people that they don't leave these more abusive communities because they fear that they won't be accepted anywhere else. And a lot of times that's what, like, specifically like Christianity and Catholicism, I can speak to those religions because they were mine at one point. Like, they instill that fear that if you are you will not belong outside of their little community, their very large community, right? I mean, my mom worked for the Catholic Church. That's how Catholic we were. And I'm the youngest of four. I am the only one who has not been married. I am the only one who had children outside of wedlock. I was going to hell, by the way. I was the only one who had two different children with two different fathers. Going to hell. Didn't get married, didn't get divorced, which is a huge sin in the Catholic Church, as we all know, right? I didn't baptize my children. I was going to hell. And my mom, even working for the Catholic Church, it was a very interesting crisis of faith after, all of the sexual abuse scandals came out and started to come out and come out and come out. My mom in her 60s, I watched all of her belief system crumble to nothing. And I started to watch her questioning her faith. but she was so far indoctrinated into it that even though she started to not believe, she still was like, well, you're going to hell because your kids aren't baptized, like even before she died, there was still that. And it's interesting to think about, like, I grew up going to church twice every Sunday, but my parents also sent me to an alternative school, which taught me to question everything. So you can imagine the confusion, right? Like, question everything, question nothing. But back to, we all want to belong to a community. We all want to feel accepted. And a big part of our mission, and we'll talk about this more in another sermon, but if you look at our mission, we it's about inclusion. You can believe in anything and be where we are. I was talking to a client and I was like, she was like, well, these sermons you guys do. I was like, yeah, like we had one on sustainability. We had one on like caring for animals. I did one on, the art of detachment. We had one on creating a home apothecary for herbs. And she was like, oh. I was like, well, what did you think we were preaching about? Like,
Yeah.
we don't preach. It's like, we talk, we gather. That's all that the sermon is. And again, it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of mine. That was my favorite part of church. That and the singing, you went and you listened to the priest tell this really cool story about their life, and that was my favorite part, because that's where you felt included. That's where you could relate, even if you didn't relate to anything else, even if you didn't like believe in anything else that he was saying, even at 9, 10 years old. Like, when I stopped really believing in everything that they were saying, I still loved to hear him tell these stories about the people that he came across, or random happenings in his life, because that's the relatable part, right? So I don't know. I don't know if I have anything else to say about any of this other than it's okay to leave a situation that doesn't feel comfortable. It's okay to look outside of your comfort zone for community. Um, Fostering a connection with yourself might be the highest form of spirituality. Um, and it takes a long time to break down things like religious wounding. And it's hard and it's scary. And finding the right community is so important, in order to do that. Having support is so important. And I think that's all I have. You guys were
Awesome.
great. Thanks,
Awesome.
Gordon and Felicia. You
Oh,
guys,
you're welcome.
yeah.
So, Nicole, you had the audacity to have children outside of the headlock of wedlock.
Yeah. Yeah. How dare I?
So
How dare I?
there were a few things that Felicia said that really kind of struck me. And one of them was about the church having, or originally meant to be, all about love. And in my own life, I discovered that there were many continuums, and one of them was that there's no such thing as dark. There's only the absence of light, right? And dark is what's left over after you suck all the light out of a room. And there's no such thing as cold. Cold is the absence of heat, and it's what remains when you suck all of the heat out of a room. And where I'm going with this is that when it comes to fear, fear is just the absence of love. It's what's left over when you suck all the love out of the room. And if the traditional religions, the structured religions, are fear-based, it's because, like Felicia noticed, there's this huge absence of love in the environment, right? And just like in a dark room, rather than trying to chase away the dark, you introduce a little bit of light, right? In a totally dark room, if you strike even just one match, the whole room lights up, right? Because the darker it is, the more effect just a little bit of light will have. And it's the same thing with fear. Rather than trying to find ways to fight fear or shed fear or overcome fear, just add a little bit more love back into the mix. And it's shocking how effective that can be.
So I want to challenge that for a minute, Gordon,
Sure.
because organized religion talks of love all the time, but love with conditions.
Absolutely. So let's talk about love with conditions. One of the things that Felicia brought up was the child abuse that happens in the church, right? And that mostly comes from forbidding priests to marry. They have
Right.
no legitimate outlet for legitimate human needs. And you know where that came from? There was a point in time when priests were allowed to marry,
Right.
but inevitably they would end up divorced. And do you know that they have discovered that the biggest cause of divorce in the world is marriage? No, but when these priests would end up divorced,
Right.
their wives would get court settlements that cost the church money, and they didn't want to lose money.
Right.
And so the best way to avoid a loss of money was to avoid divorce, and the best way to avoid divorce is to forbid marriage.
Mhm.
But then you get this whole other set of symptoms that come up.
Right.
And I've heard it said that it's only that is revealed that can be healed. So with all this sexual repression in the structured church, people go with unhealed wounds around their own sexuality for sometimes lifetimes. Sometimes they're
Oh.
never
Hmm.
resolved. And it's all because of fear-based control within
Right.
these religions,
Hmm.
right? So they talk about love, but they practice an art, or they practice it's really a religion of fear.
Yeah. That's really what it is. I mean, you know, God will love you if you follow him, right? Like, but love was never meant to have conditions. Love is truly the truest form of love, is the most unconditional thing. Like, you are you and I am me, and that's it. That's it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And regarding people with other points of view outside of the Abrahamic religions, my train of thought just got derailed. Um, oh
That
gosh,
eclipse energy.
yeah, exactly.
It's
Uh,
just like, what? It's too much.
it'll come back. But going back to the priest thing and the restrictions, it
Hmm.
wasn't just on priests, it was on nuns too.
Oh, I
Have you
know.
ever noticed that they always travel in pairs, that you
Yeah.
never see one nun by herself? That's a control mechanism too. And the way that I've heard it put is that they have to travel in pairs so that one nun don't get none. And that's their version of control over the
Right.
female uh,
Yeah.
priesthood. Yeah, but it's terrible.
Yeah. It's fear-based love, right? It goes back to that like, it's like an abusive relationship, right? Well, you know, they abuse me because they love me. And
Exactly.
and that's why people have so much wounding, right? They think that that's what love is. And they think that they have to do all of these things in order to get love, right? Pay the church the money and God will love you. Uh, go to church all the time and God will love you. Stay with your husband even though you don't love him and God will love you, you know, and you will be accepted into heaven. So we're doing all of these things on earth now in order to potentially be in some beautiful afterlife. But if you slip up just one time, you won't get there.
Yep.
It's it's so wild. There's this TV show that came out a while back and it's called The Good Place.
Oh, I saw
And
it.
it is so wonderful. Um I think anyone who deals with any kind of like religious stuff should probably watch it. Um, because it really shows that like it doesn't matter how good you are on earth, how wonderful you've been, it's a rigged system, right? You'll never get there. And that's not the point. And it's never been the point. And my hope and a big part of our hope here is that people understand that there are other ways. And our thing is to kind of help show people that there are other ways. So,
I got my train of thought back.
oh, good.
And it's totally consistent with what you just said. And it's that outside of the Abrahamic religions and some of the other formalists, when people choose different ways, if they choose quote unquote not Jesus or not God or whatever, there is a Jesuit priest by the name of Richard Rohr, and he said that God's made a provision for everybody, and it's not dependent on whether or not you like him, because God's bigger than that, right?
Yeah, I love that. All right, we are almost at the hour. I don't know if I've ever done a sermon for a whole hour anyway. Um,
This was
I
awesome.
I didn't know what it was going to look like when I came into this. And normally every time I've done a sermon, I've like written a whole thing. And I was like, I'm just going to come in and see what happens. And I loved having the back and forth. That's maybe my favorite part about this is it is about community. It's not just about one person standing on a pedestal and or a soapbox and speaking their truth. It's about sharing communal truth. Um, and I love that that's kind of what we're doing here. So thank you, Gordon and Felicia, for being here and supporting me. And I mean, supporting all of us, right? But supporting me in my talk because that really helped a lot today for me. So we're not doing one next week. But the following week, it's going to be, I think Jordan and Jess and I kind of really coming together to talk about our mission so that there may be no confusion anymore about what we're doing. Because we really do want to bring together people and we want to grow our community of like-minded individuals who believe in whatever they want to believe in, whether it be nothing, whether it be one God, whether it be many gods, whether it be themselves, right? That's kind of the heart and soul of it all. So thank you guys for being here with me today. And for anyone who watches the replay of this, thanks for sitting through and following all of our trains. I hope that you caught something like something tangible and wonderful. So happy Saturday.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks,
Right.
friends.
Bye.
Be well.
Bye.